Hello everyone, and welcome to the first Out and Equal webinar of 2019, titled, What About the Bi? Better Engage Bisexuals in Your Company and Dedicate Time and Resources to the Bi in your LGBT+ group. My name is Ben Demers. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Senior Associate at Out and Equal University, and I'll be your host for today's call. Today's presenters will review strategies for making bisexual employees feel more included in your workplace, such as setting up a Bi 101 toolbox, implementing bi-inclusive language, and other tips. Many in the bi community, myself included, know that we're often erased from larger LGBTQ narratives or made to buy into this idea of choosing a side. So I'm really excited to see what our presenters have to share with you all today on the call, especially with some studies showing that the majority of LGBTQ community actually identifies as bisexual, and as younger generations are increasingly identifying as not monosexual. These conversations are ones that we encourage you to push in your companies and to reflect in the LGBTQ inclusive programming that you host. Before we get started, there are a few logistical items I want to stress. This is a broadcast audio call being held from 12 to 1 Pacific Standard Time, meaning you should be able to hear the sound through your computer. If you begin having issues with this during the call, please feel welcome to call in to the corresponding number. If you or a coworker is listening but unsure how to sign in, go to readytalk.com, click Join a Meeting, and use access code 6946521 to join. If you have any logistical questions during the call at all, please chat in and I'll respond to you quickly. We also ask that if you have any questions on the content discussed on today's call, that you send them in for our presenters to discuss during the Q&A session at the end of the session. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording and slide deck will both be shared with all who registered after the call for you to watch again or for you to share amongst your coworkers. I also want to mention some upcoming webinars and events at Out and Equal. So on Wednesday, February 13th, we'll be hosting our first global webinar of 2019 and our first ever Spanish language webinar, Perspectives from Latin America, LGBTQ Inclusion in the Workplace, which will be completely in Spanish and feature 3 excellent speakers in the field of LGBTQ diversity and inclusion. So if your company potentially has operations or even an ERG chapter in a Spanish-speaking country, I encourage you to share this resource with them. On February 28th, we'll have our next virtual summit series webinar titled Mergers and Acquisitions and Divestitures, Oh My, how your employee resource group can navigate through a period of change for the company. And we would love to see you join for that and learn just another way how your ERG can support your company's business interests. We're also very excited to be hosting our annual Out and Equal Executive Forum this year from April 16th to 18th in San Francisco. So the forum brings together LGBTQ and ally professionals to engage in professional development and explore key trends in LGBTQ workplace inclusion. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, please stick around for the last few minutes of today's call for an announcement from the director of Out and Equal University, Isabel Cuadras. I also want to announce that Out and Equal is officially an approved provider for both SHRM and HRCI credits. You can claim your credit for attending this session using the activity IDs listed. And remember that this slide deck will be shared after the call for you to reference in case you aren't able to get that number now or you want to share it with any of your coworkers. Now, before I hand things over to our presenters, I want to introduce a special guest to kick off today's session. We have with us the Chief Operating Officer of Out and Equal, Erin Urides, who has a few words of welcome for today's attendees. Erin, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Ben. Hi, everybody. It's Erin. I am just thrilled to be with you today. I wanted to come on, especially during this webinar, and open it up by just saying how grateful we are that you're attending with us, and to share with you that for me, as a bisexual, pansexual, queer-identified person, that my journey with this identity has been one of excitement, fear, isolation, self-isolation, and coming out again and again, and a whole lot of learning. Many of you have heard my story. I've been really open with it since the very beginning, that when I attended my first Out and Equal Summit in 2001, I went to the one bisexual workshop that year, and I actually lied to my gay male colleagues who I attended the summit with and told them I was going to some HR tracked event, and kind of sheepishly went and wasn't even sure if anybody else would be in the room. So when I walked in and found the first other bisexual identified people that I had ever met in my life, there was a whole lot of laughter and tears, and the room was packed, and I was just so grateful to be there because it was the first time that I actually felt connection and we're meeting other people that identified like me, but also it was the beginning of my journey to understand and kind of play with the language around this identity, because it had been, you know, kind of painful for me and part of myself that I had hidden. Fast forward a little bit, I came back to my company, felt the courage to come out within the ERG, and then, you know, in the broader community, and then in 2007 went over to the Middle East, where I had to go back in the closet for kind of legal and political reasons, which you all can imagine, and also partnered for the first time again with a man who I ended up marrying for a few years, and then was gone out of the country for 9 years. So when I came back 2 years ago, kind of the whole landscape around this identity, our identity, and the language was really exciting to me. And I found myself, you know, Googling pansexual and really with a lot of excitement trying to connect again with people. And so when I took this job as CEO, I think I may still be the only bisexual identified leader of a national LGBTQ organization. I've had so many people come out to me, reconnect with me, and it has been a pure joy, because as Ben said, we know the statistics about our community. We know how many people identify like we do. And it's just been a real pleasure, and you all give me a lot of courage to keep talking and to just keep connecting. I'm really excited that Out and Equal is stepping forward and doing a whole lot more with bi+ and queer identity, and we will continue to do that. So what I love about today, about this webinar, is that we go from longing for kind of understanding and progress to really digging into how do you continue to bring the B into the workplace, and with a whole lot of concrete and exciting tips from 3 wonderful people who are very much a beloved part of the Out and Equal community. So without further ado, I will say that I'm gonna sit back as a participant and welcome the 3 of you to the webinar, and thank you very much, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you, Erin. With that, I'm going to turn it over to today's presenters. We're joined today by Stacey Kelly, Kelly Thompson, and Steve Mitchell, who first presented this session at the 2018 Workplace Summit in Seattle and have been gracious enough to join us today to continue that conversation. So please remember, if you have any questions, send them in through the chat function, and they'll be answering them in the Q&A session at the end of today's call. So Stacey, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Erin. So we are very thrilled to have a worldwide audience today for this workshop that we are very passionate about. We are glad that you are here and you belong. So let me just get started by introducing myself. So this is my voice. I'm Stacey Kelly. And if you could advance the slide for us, Ben. I work for Bank of America. I am a cisgender female. My pronouns are she and her, and I identify as bisexual and pansexual. And Kelly?
Hi there, everybody. I'm Kelly Thompson. I also identify as female. My pronouns are she and her. I work in the Detroit area for Alex Partners, a business consulting firm. I am married to a man. I have 2 children, and I am out to my family and to my work colleagues, but really only just recently. Over to you, Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Mitchell. I work for Barclays Bank in the Las Vegas area. I lead the customer care department, as well as the national co-chair of Spectrum, which is our LGBT+ employee resource group. And I also am a board of director member of our Pride organization. I'm married. I also have 2 kids. I am out to my family, and I am out to some of my coworkers at work. And we could talk a little bit more what that means in a little bit. Back to you, Stacey.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So I should probably share some additional things. So I'm married. I'm married to a man. I have certainly had multiple relationships with opposite sex and same sex throughout my lifetime. I've been out since I was 16, and I'm 40-something. So I'm very excited to be here. I am very out. I have been out for a long time. I'm out at work, certainly a leader in our LGBT+ Pride organization and ERG throughout my company. representing the state of Maine and New Hampshire. So I'm up in the polar vortex space. Hopefully you guys are all staying warm today. Okay, so we can advance the slide. Let's talk about our introductions and objectives today. So what do you think of when you hear the term bisexual? It's interesting when you talk to people, it means a lot of different things. So getting us on the same page right away will be very helpful in terms of definition. So an overall term for people who are attracted to more than one gender. We're going to talk today about what bi-erasure is, bi-phobia. Those are some terms you may have heard, and we'll understand why they're different, as well as some stereotypes. And where are we? I was listening to Erin's conversation and description of her, out and equal experience, and here I was 17 years later having a very similar experience at Out and Equal, wondering where are my bees? Last year was amazing, and I'm very excited about the growth and opportunity with Out and Equal. But where are we in our companies as well? Where are we in our communities and social media and everywhere? So why do we get lost in the alphabet, the LGBTQA+? The B is kind of overshadowed sometimes, a lot of the time. So we'll talk more about that. And the much larger bisexual community that was present in Out and Equal I mentioned a moment ago is very exciting. I'm excited to hear things like 20 by teen is here. Instead of 2019, it's by teen. So a lot of new inclusion of bisexual characters on sitcoms and dramas on television. I grew up in the 80s and 90s having absolutely no model or example, and just feeling many of the emotions that Erin shared of isolation, self-isolation. So we'll talk about that. And then what we want you to take away from the workshop today. So it's important. You are all leaders and have the ability to help us make the change that we want to see. So adapt your language, not assume or make assumptions, and lead others in the same journey. Create space and representation for bisexuals in your workplace to ensure inclusivity and advocacy. And then represent and promote the bi resources that are available. And if you don't know what those are, we will provide you an awesome list at the end of the session. So I'm going to welcome Steve, and he is going to talk about definitions for bisexuality.
Great, thank you. So there are a lot of definitions that you can find about bisexuality, but this one I think the three of us agree is by far the best one. It's by Robin Ochs. She's an author. She has a couple of books. I think we might have them in our list. But her definition is, I call myself bisexual because I acknowledge in myself the potential to be attracted romantically and or sexually to people of more than one sex, not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily in the same way, and not necessarily to the same degree. So that's a pretty inclusive definition of what it means to be bisexual. Bisexual identity is really, it lives on a spectrum. I think straight and gay can be very binary. You're one or the other, and that's why I think people have a hard time getting their head around what does it mean to be bisexual. Even the bisexual community, I think, sometimes misrepresents bisexuality. You can go to some of the bisexual shops like on Zazzle. You can buy a 50-50 shirt. But, I think you would find very few bisexuals who would say that they're, straight down the line 50-50. Some might find themselves more attracted sexually than romantically. Some might find themselves attracted more romantically than sexually. So it's a very, very wide spectrum that bisexual people move along. So it's important to realize that it's not 50-50. And people can also be serially monogamous, meaning that in my case, currently married to a woman, have been for a very long time. When I came out to my best friend, he asked me if I was planning on stepping outside of our marriage. And I said, no, I didn't have plans to do that. And he said, well, then I wouldn't tell anybody you're bi because you probably don't want to advertise, and then not deliver. So there's so many weird assumptions like that. But just be aware that it's not 50-50. So today we'll be using terms like bi plus and bisexual interchangeably to be inclusive of identifications that include bi, pan, omni, and some others. So we're really wanting to talk a little bit broader than just bisexual because that is an umbrella that a lot of other identities can fall under as well. So we do have a poll that we would like to have you take right now. We are just really curious about, who's represented on the call. So we would ask you to answer the letter that fits the best. So A is I am an out bi professional at work and am aware of other out bi colleagues. B, I am an out bi professional at work, but I am not aware of other out bi colleagues. C, I am not out at work, but I am aware of other out bi colleagues. D, I am not out at work and am not aware of other bi colleagues. I'm an ally and I'm aware of other out bi colleagues, or I'm an ally and I'm not aware of out bi colleagues. So see the responses coming in. A lot of allies who are aware. That's great. And almost as many who are not aware. Okay, well, it's great to see that there are a lot of allies, and there appears to be a lot of awareness out there from our allies. And let's see, not out but aware by colleagues is one of the smaller numbers. Okay, great. Could we go on to the next slide? Unless Kelly or Stacey, you have anything you want to add to those results?
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, great. So Kelly, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. This is Kelly. I want to talk about language a little bit. It really is the most practical way to engage bisexuals in your company. It's really, when you think about it, the most practical way that we engage with each other as human beings. So we want to take a minute to talk about what inclusive language means and how we can use it and be more aware of it. No one has the right to define another's label, so we really want to take the time to learn what others want to be called and what others are comfortable with. Don't be afraid to ask, what term do you identify with, or what term is comfortable for you? We don't want to assume that one term fits all because, like Steve said before, in the world of bisexuality especially, that is certainly not the case. There's so many terms. The language is, pardon the pun, very fluid and evolving, and we want to just be aware of the fact that certain people will have different identities and different terms that they are comfortable with. So two of the big terms that we wanted to address is bi-phobia and bi-erasure. Bi-phobia is that systemic problem really that we see where bisexuality is deemed illegitimate or trendy, promiscuous, it doesn't matter. Assumptions are made like, oh, well, you're bisexual, you must be a pervert, or you can't be faithful to one person because you're bisexual, or now you're going to go after my girlfriend, or now you're going to go after my boyfriend, you must be into threesomes. All those stereotypes and all those maybe throwaway comments that you think are a throwaway comment, they're really not throwaway comments. They really matter. Words really do matter and have an impact. So if you are hearing those things being said in your groups, in your one-on-one conversations, take note of that and be aware of how that might impact the bisexuals that are in your group. And if you're on this call today and you are not aware of bisexuals in your company, I promise you they're there. I promise they're there. They may not be ready to come out. They may not be ready or feel comfortable to come out in your organization yet, but by learning this type of language and learning what language is inclusive versus oppressive, it will help them feel more comfortable in coming out in your group. The bi-erasure term is similar to bi-phobia, but it's more the concept of the idea that bisexuality doesn't exist. It's make-believe. You're not bisexual, you're just gay. I think a lot of us have heard that. You're on your way to gay. You just haven't admitted to yourself that you're gay. I've had a colleague tell me that I don't believe in bisexuality, and which I responded, it's not Santa Claus. You don't get to just make it exist by whether you believe in it or not. It's an actual thing. But to be told that you don't exist or that how you identify is not a real quote-unquote thing, that really has an impact on people, and that's going to make people feel invalidated and oppressed and not open to, wanting to be out at work or be out with their family. So the results of biphobia and bi-erasure, in our society, it's really troubling. There's data that shows it really heightens the risk of mental health issues, eating disorders, STDs. Bisexuals are not comfortable seeking the help they need because they're being told they don't exist. They're being told they're perverts. They're being told, hey, what you are doesn't matter. So when we're talking about the language that is used in day-to-day conversation, it really does have an impact. As Steve said before, there are a lot of terms for bisexual. You've got bisexual, pansexual, panromantic. There's been a push to use bi plus or fluid or queer, something a little more encompassing because some folks think bisexual can be limiting as a term. The other terms that you may hear are pansexual, demisexual, omnisexual. There's also been a push to take the word sexual out of the term altogether. And the idea there is, we don't use homosexual or heterosexual when we're describing someone that is straight or gay. We just say Sally is gay, or Joe is straight, or they are straight, they are lesbian. We don't say they are homosexual or she is heterosexual. So when you have that term sexual in the actual term bisexual, it can feel a little oppressive and a little bit like, hey, you're just pigeonholing me as a sexual being when I'm so much more than that. So there's a push too to just have different terms altogether where the term sexual is not part of the term itself. So you've got fluid, queer. Queer is a really big one that's really been recalibrated and reconnected with the younger generation. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and when you called someone queer, that was really not a plus. That was a slur. That had a negative connotation. So nowadays, the younger generation has reclaimed that word and made it a positive identification that they use, and I applaud that. I think that's great. So the concept here is to just be aware that there are a lot of terms out there, and we do want to be aware of how people identify might change during their life. It might change from day to day, from year to year, as we all grow as a society and determine what words we're comfortable with. But that words really, really do matter. Some of the do's and don'ts that we kind of put together when we were putting together this presentation, one of the big do's that really resonated with me was to learn from your mistakes and don't repeat the same mistake that you have made. So if you do use a offensive term, or if you get called out because, hey, that was hurtful or that was offensive, really take the time to learn what that means and why it was offensive, because that will help you learn it going forward. And part of that also stems into the idea that what we say in our private words and our private conversations with our parents, our kids, our spouses, our partners, our best friends, when you have those close connecting conversations, you want to use the language that you know is correct, because it's really a habit. The words that we use are a habit. So to teach yourself discipline and not just say, well, I have to turn on my good language because I'm at work now and I'm in my ERG and I have to turn on all my good language. If you really attack it more like, I'm going to learn from that encounter I just had with Sally, and I'm going to incorporate that into all of my conversations, private and public, then that becomes a habit for you. And now you've really learned, what that person, where that person is coming from. I like to go back to the old saying from Aristotle, which is, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act but a habit. So the more we do things, the more we are things. And the more you practice and try to learn from the mistakes that we've made, the better we are. Another do is to realize that not everyone lives at one point on that spectrum that Steve talked about. They don't always live on the same point on the spectrum for their entire lives. We need to respect that the need for someone to use a newer term to identify themselves at a different part in their lives is okay, because we really, again, we don't have the right to define someone else's label. If they need to have another term because they're on a different journey, then we need to respect that. We also need to be aware that some of the allies that are in your group may actually be queer or fluid or questioning or bi, and the language that you use in your workspace may help them to feel comfortable to come out or to ask questions or even to just learn more about themselves. So like I said earlier, if you're on this call and you're saying to yourself, I want to learn, but I don't know any bi people, and I'm not sure how to reach out to them, trust me, you are reaching out to them with all of the language that you use every day in your ERG, in your company. You will reach out to them, and they will hear you if you're using the right language and you're not repeating the same mistakes. Some of the don'ts on our do's and don'ts list is to not assume that one label fits every bisexual person. Again, we talked a little bit about that. We want to ask people what term they prefer and don't apply to everyone the same term. We want to make an effort to remember that each person has individual desires and wants. Another don't that we have is, and I talked about this a little bit, is to use terms in private that you wouldn't use in public. So again, just get in the habit of learning what language is out there, what language your people and your teams and your coworkers are comfortable with, and then implement those into your everyday language, whether you're at work and you're quote unquote on, or if you're at home and just, kicking it back with your homies and you want to use the right language, that's going to make a difference. And then the biggest don't that I thought of when we were putting this together is when someone hears all these rules, quote unquote, or labels, and they think, oh my gosh, this is really hard. Like, I don't want to make a mistake and offend someone, so I'm just not going to do anything. And that would be a big mistake. Don't disengage because you're afraid of using the wrong language. Ask, learn, implement that stuff, those words into your vocabulary. Don't just back off and say, gosh, there's a lot of rules for this. There's a lot of labels I have to learn and memorize. It will come naturally as you practice, and it will also come naturally as you progress with your ERGs and people start to come out and realize that you are an open and engaging organization and group that welcomes bisexuals. I think that's all I have on the language part of things. If we want to progress to the next space.
Yeah, Kelly, I know you're going to throw it over to me, but before we go, as I was listening to your presentation, I was watching some of the strings of questions. So, Ben, can I ask you to go back one slide? Actually, 2 slides. Yep. Back to Kelly's page. So what I saw are some questions around the differences between bisexuality, pansexuality, omni, and some of those other terms. So I think probably let's just spend a second clarifying that. So bisexuality has a history of referencing more of the bi, or the idea of there being two on a continuum, male being at one end, female being at the other. And so as our awareness within our community has expanded, and we have welcomed also the idea of and the acceptance of the trans community as well as the non-binary community, the bisexuality term just rubbed some parts of our community kind of the wrong way, or they felt that it was exclusive, wherein pansexuality is kind of a broader term where you are communicating by using the term pansexuality. You are definitively open to non-binary and the trans community and sort of that Q plus space. So as I introduced myself earlier, I'm Stacey Kelly. I recognize and identify as bisexual and pansexual. But I'll tell you, I came out when I was 16 in like 1987, 86. That's who I am. I've been using that term for a lot of years. But I started using pansexuality over the last couple of years because I recognize and have always, to a degree, recognized within myself that, I have attraction and an emotional connection and romantic and sexual connection with people who are non-binary and trans. So I needed to evolve my language to describe myself so that I wasn't excluding people that I love and are a part of who I am and how I identify. Omnisexual, I'll take a page out of my son who loves dinosaurs, so an omnivore, right, eats both meat and vegetables, right? So the idea that omni is again, sort of one of those broader terms, much like pansexual, where it's just a broader spectrum than maybe the concept of bi. And I think I saw quite a lot of questions on those few topics, so hopefully I've covered that. But if not, we can come back to that in the Q&A section. And thank you for your questions. We'll try to keep rolling through those as we go. So Ben, if we can advance now, I'll talk about a toolbox. This is something that I'm very proud about at my company. We have adopted an automated learning session or webinar, much like this session that you're sitting in on today, that we call Bi 101. We also have an Ally 101 and some other Trans 101 and some other content. But specifically, we built a Bi 101 class to acknowledge that our bi community needed to be represented separately from our gay and lesbian. You know, it's not just enough to have, you know, maybe like a courageous conversation or a staged, you know, panel presentation where you put a female lesbian and a gay man up there and you say, okay, we've taken care of the bi because they're somewhere in between. It's not enough. We are different, and we have different needs, and we have different concerns and issues that we face. So creating that space that is designed specifically for and honors the bisexual community speaks a lot about your inclusivity and your diversity. So again, vocabulary, definitions, those are critical elements. That's the foundation with which we learn to speak to one another. And to Kelly's point earlier, if we don't have that, you lose people. They shut down. They just don't participate because they're so afraid of saying the wrong thing. So establishing, you know, either a toolbox that's, you know, a physical document, catalog, or the automated webinar that I'm, you know, describing, offering that vocabulary and definition foundation is just a tremendous place to start and a great place to grow from. Issues facing the bi plus community. So having same or different sex permanent partners, and then, you know, you walk into a room, and if I'm with my spouse who is a man and I am female, people just assume we're straight, you know, but I'm not, and so I have to always, you know, make sure that I kind of stake my claim on my identity, wherein my prior partner who was female, every time we entered a room, people assumed, well, aren't they the cute lesbian couple? You know, so you've got to identify that, you know, some of your bi community is just dealing with very different things than your straight, your gay, your lesbian community. So that's a perfect example. And then targeting this bi-phobic language, bi-erasure, you know, the idea of picking a side, it's just a phase, you're on your way to gay. One of my favorite responses, oh, you're bi, that's hot. Yes, I am hot, but that's an inappropriate comment. And let me explain to you why. That makes me uncomfortable. I recognized a few people in the chat window were asking questions about, you know, what do you do when you're presented with that type of thing? So, you know, maybe humor is a good tactic, but, you know, addressing those things as issues that face your bi plus community can be incredibly empowering and teach people a lot. How to be an ally to bi plus colleagues. This is a strategic effort that you give space to where people don't know what to say. So when they hear biphobic or bi-erasure language, how can they combat that? How can they step up and be, you know, maybe not even just an ally or an advocate, but actually be a champion? We teach the difference between those three levels, and the champion being the ideal, the person that makes change, that sets the example, that takes initiative. And it's not just enough to have those feelings and thoughts in your head and your heart, but you've got to take a meaningful action in your workspace to create the change. A Q&A that's designed, again, to support the bi colleagues in your company. You know, what do they want the rest of the community to know about the issues that they face? And actively asking them for that input. So sending out the blast email to your ERG or hosting a session and then at the end asking for input, you know, hey, email me, you know, if you identify as bi or you have a passion about some of these things, we're looking for your input. If you wonder where your bis are, if you ask them for input, we'll come out of the woodwork because we're listening, we're waiting. We are so hungry for you to ask. Provide an online library of resources. So again, we'll talk more about that in a few pages. But book references, articles, there's so much more being produced out there in the social media environment, so be cautious and selective about what you choose. But the Bi Resource Center is amazing. But I would also say that Glesson and some of those, you know, terrific organizations, and we'll go through a list later, are all building out more content in the bisexual space, which is super exciting. Robin Oakes, we talked about her as an author. Her Getting Bi book is a collection of the most heartfelt, truthful out stories for bisexuals around the world, and it's an amazing piece of literature. So to add that to your library. I have bought that book by the dozens and handed it out on the regular. So I think I'm probably one of Robin's biggest fans. Williams Institute and some other spaces that provide data to make the business case. That's important for a lot of us that work in environments where the numbers are things that people look for. So there's some great resources we'll share with you in a moment. And then discuss timing and rollout options. So if you're offering these resources for your gay community or your lesbian community or trans community, how many times are you offering this bi content? Make sure that it is appropriate for your audience and that it is offered, especially when you first start it, maybe a little more often so that people have that opportunity to see that your company is taking some aggressive and meaningful steps in the right direction. Tell your LGBT story, the importance of sharing your personal stories. I've got to do that work every day. I come out over and over and over again. I have for years. But I'm taking this personal journey these last 4 or 5 years to tell my story more often in places where, it sometimes is very uncomfortable, or I'm not having it that day. I'm sick of talking about it. I'm not in the mood, but I know I need to do the work. I need to represent. So find your engaged bisexuals in your business area and, tell them how much you need them to step out and encourage them and support them in their effort to do this work for you by telling their story and representing. Newsletter, maybe your ERG has a newsletter. Make a corner, make some space for that is strictly for your bisexual content. That is a tremendous, focal point. It draws attention, but it also sends that message, that verbal and nonverbal and physical message to your bi community that you mean it and that you're putting some substance behind your effort. Okay, and we'll move on to the next, and we'll welcome Steve.
Yeah, actually, if we could go back one slide, I do want to make a quick comment on the bottom two. So at my company 2 years ago, right around National Coming Out Day, we hosted an event that was broadcast through our town halls, through the video system, called Telling Your LGBT Story. We actually had 6 people, and all the sites were represented. 6 people got up and told their stories, and we made sure that we had the L, the G, the B, and the T represented. And so we actually had a bisexual person stand up and tell their coming out story. And they focused a little bit on, what that was like at work, specifically. And the power of that, I can't even begin to describe it. About a month after that, I had someone come to me because someone asked a question about being an ally to the trans community in our question section here. So this person came to me after we had that event and said that they represented differently outside of work than they represented in work. So they wanted to come out as female at work. And so I worked with that person for about 6 months and wrote a book for HR, a handbook on if you're a manager and you have someone who comes and wants to transition, what are the things that you need to do? So that's now available on our HR portal. But I stood with this person step by step by step, and until the day that they came to work presenting as their authentic self. So that is certainly one way you can be an ally, is in a very real way be there for them. And if your company allows you to do something like telling your story, we've done it a second year, and the stories are very powerful and life-changing, and they actually cause people to feel comfortable enough at work to come out. We've had several people, including some bi colleagues, who have come out and said that they've never been out at work, but they've never felt so comfortable at a place of employment that they did come out. And then the newsletter, we kind of continue that, telling your story through the newsletter. Each of our sites highlights a member of our spectrum group, and sometimes we'll do like 1 month will be allies. So here's some allies, and here's their story. And then in September we highlight bisexual employees because it's Bi Visibility Day on the 23rd of September. So you can get very specific in areas like that, and I can't tell you how far that goes for the people that want to be out that aren't out. So I just wanted to add those 2 points. So we can go on to the next slide. So creating space, celebrating, advocating. As Stacey was saying, like create space and plan events specifically for bisexuals, whether it's in a corner in the newsletter or at an actual event, having a brunch, having a social event, specifically geared toward your bi community, community-related events. Does your community center or local LGBTQ center have bi activities? And do you make your members aware of them and help sponsor them? I spoke about 2 years ago to someone who worked at our LGBT center here in town and asked if I went to the gay man support group on Wednesday nights and I said I was bisexual, would I be welcome? And they kind of laughed and said, yeah, probably not. But there's absolutely no social event anywhere in the area that I live in, which is a fairly big area, specifically for bis. So rather than just hanging my head and saying, well, that's terrible, I decided to get involved. And I started writing for Pride magazine out here. So every issue we have a bi corner that I write, and I tackle a different aspect of the bi life. And the executive of Las Vegas Pride asked me if we could do an entire section on bisexuality in October, which is our Pride Month out here. So by getting involved, by volunteering to do things, by representing bisexuality within your community, it won't take too long before people are coming to you with ideas and really wanting to make the visibility even bigger. Another thing you can do is research and promote bi-related activities, events, and history. Bisexual Health Awareness Month, IDAHOBIT, which I found a lot of people don't know about it. Our company is based in the UK, so this may be more of a European thing. It stands for International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. And so that's a day that we celebrate every May, and we make a big deal about it at work. As I said, September 23rd, Bi Visibility Day, and actually that entire week is Bi Awareness Week. You can have Pride Month celebration, include images and stories of historical bi figures. You can also reach out to some of your other ERGs. Something that we started doing this year is I reached out to our Black Professional Forum and said, hey, can I provide you with some LGBT trailblazers or heroes that you can highlight during Black Professional Month? So we provided 4 or 5 names with some write-ups of historical Black men and women who were trailblazers in the LGBT community, and now so the BPF is going to highlight them in some of their activities and newsletters. And then setting up an LGBTQ library, include authors and resources, which we have at the end of the deck, and then ensure diversity of panel and speakers at your events. So like when we did the Telling Your Story, we made sure that we had the 4 major letters covered. So Kelly, Stacey, would you add anything to that?
I think you did a great job, Steve. It's a comprehensive list.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to the resource examples on the next page.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in. These resources have been utilized in part by my company, in part by Steve's company, and I know that in many of these instances, Kelly's working very hard with her company to build out more resources. So, this is a great list to start from, but I would encourage you to go out and look for additional resources. Just be very thoughtful about the expertise and the sourse of the information. For example, I would take an HRC article over a BuzzFeed, top 10 reasons why you're bi, that type of thing. So just, be very selective, read the materials, look at where they've sourced their information. If they're, adding data, take a look at where they got that information from. We're in kind of an interesting space of information on the internet. Not all of it's true. So we will have this list available in the deck material. What I would love to do is, now that we've got about 15 minutes left, I've been reading through some of the questions, and so I'm going to shout out a couple and ask Steve and Kelly to jump in on ones that they want to answer. I'm going to take this first one because it really struck home with me. So James, you asked a question about the disconnect in the community because bi people can pass as straight when they're in an opposite sex relationship. And I have some experience in this arena at my current company because I was in a same-sex relationship, and when that relationship dissolved, as sometimes they do, I moved on to the next relationship, and that is my spouse. We've been together now 17 years. But I had to come out when I started working at the company, and everybody thought I was a lesbian. I was constantly, correcting that I'm bi, my partner's lesbian. And then when I moved on to my spouse who's male, I had to come out and remind everybody that that's what bi is, and then everybody assuming that I'm straight. So I had large, swaths of friends that I lost on both ends of that spectrum for multiple reasons, and then a group in the middle that was loyal and accepting to me all along. And I will tell you, within the LGBT community, I was judged very harshly because, it was the idea that I was representing the community until I married a man, and that somehow I had betrayed, my LGBT family. And I was very hurt by that because I'd never agreed, of being pigeonholed in my same-sex relationship, always correcting, always reminding people that bisexuality is how I identify. That's who I have always been. And so sometimes we are within the LGBT community tougher on ourselves. This is not an oppression Olympics. It's not a competition. Everybody suffers in their way, handles it in their way, and everybody deserves compassion and respect. That would be my advice on that topic, and I'm really appreciative that you answered or asked that question, James.
So, Stacey, if I could take the next one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go
there's
ahead.
a question in here from Tara. Can you define bi-erasure a bit more? I can give you 3 very quick examples. Almost everyone refers to Brokeback Mountain as a gay movie, but if you think about it, the 2 male stars had both male and female relationships. They were married. So really not so much a gay movie as it is a bi movie. Same thing could be said for more recently, Call Me By Your Name, where the male leads were actually bisexual and not gay as they had relationships in both directions. And then most recently, if you saw the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, there's a scene in there that to me is such the picture of what it is like to come out as bisexual. When Freddie Mercury tells Mary, the woman he's married to, that he's bisexual, her response is, "Freddie, you're gay," right? So all of those are examples of bi-erasure, where the characters are bi, and in one case even says he's bi, and the reaction is, no, you're gay, right? So those are 3 examples of bi-erasure. It's, you're on your way to gay, or someone that is gay came out as bi first and then moved on to gay because they thought it would be easier, so therefore everybody else that's bi must be on that same path. So hopefully that sheds a little more light on that for you.
That's great, Steve. Thank you. Lauren asked a question about being hypersexualized, especially by men, when you're a bisexual woman. I blame 100% of this on, the television and movie depiction of bisexual females, porn, those types of things. It really, for a lot of people, their only, introduction to what a bisexual person is that, the female unicorn, that's down for anything with whomever. And, it's insulting. I'm a very selective person. I'm very particular. And, the assumption that people make and that hypersexualization really works against our community, but it works against women in general. I think that, we kind of carry some extra burden as bisexual women, but women in general in the workplace, deal with those types of things. So hitting it straight where it is, dealing with it when you hear it and see it. So providing your allies, modeled ways of handling those types of sort of hot box scenarios when you hear this on the floor, when you have a colleague who says these things and they think they're joking, how do you handle that? I think that's really a great way to enable your staff to make the change. Brian Kelly, or Steve Kelly, anything you'd like to say on that?
No, not on that. But there's an interesting question from Jessica about how does the panel feel about exclusionary events, ones where it is LGBT only and not allies or bis in this case. I can tell you we would never have an exclusionary event. We may have an event that is centered around, a particular demographic like bisexuals, but everybody would be invited to come, and we would use that as an opportunity for people to come and learn and hopefully kind of engage them as allies. So we had talked about that, but we specifically said we did not want to be exclusionary. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I'll jump in too. Our company struggled with that a little bit. We had some very passionate, sort of side organizations, Lesbians Who Code, some gay men's choir, activities and things like that can feel a little exclusionary. But I love that you shared your company has taken a specific, made a decision that they're not going to have those types of exclusionary environments. What I love about that is that it reminds us within the LGBTQ plus community, we are allies and advocates for each other. The enemy is not within our team. the work is out there. So, the infighting and the lack of support, we've got to fix that. And we probably do that best when we lock arms and we do things together. So I love that your company is doing that, Steve.
This is Kelly. I wanted to tackle a couple of questions that don't feel related, but I'm going to relate them anyway. William asked about what progress do the presenters think have been made to tackle bi-erasure in recent years. And then a couple of different people asked about how to tackle polyamorous or ethical non-monogamy relationships and how the stereotypes for those two things kind of weigh in on bisexuals as well. The reason I think these are kind of related is the progress that we've had as far as tackling bi-erasure. I think one of the big progresses that we've had as a society is representation in the media. And having characters on television and film and writing books that are bisexual, that are being written with bisexual people in mind and characters being created for that, that goes a long way. I'm a big believer in representation matters, and when you grow up your whole life not seeing anybody on TV or in the movies that represents, the core piece of you, that's really hard. That's really tough. That goes for any, minority group. But especially with bisexuals, it's only really happened in the last decade or so that bisexual characters have been really represented well in the mainstream shows like, How to Get Away with Murder, Grey's Anatomy, TV shows, movies, those kinds of things. So I feel like we've made some progress in that, and that's been a very visible and easily accessed way that we've fought the bi-erasure and the bi-phobia. And the reason I wanted to kind of tie that into the questions about poly is that I feel like we're at the crux of being able to do that for the poly community as well. We're starting to just now see authors and screenwriters talk about poly relationships in the media, in mainstream. I think in the next few years we're really going to see a big change for that. And it's not something that's taboo and perverted, and it is a lifestyle choice. And I feel like we're not there yet, but we're really on the crux. The more I do research and even just clicking around on my social media and seeing different articles and different shows pop up, the more I think, the poly community is really going to, kind of make a run for it in the next couple of years. And I, for one, am glad for that. I identify as poly, and I want to, educate people, on that, in that community and make sure that that's something that's represented. One of the specific parts of the questions was the way I talked about if assumptions of bisexuals being, you must be involved in threesomes and threesomes are bad. I think the larger message there really is just the assumption in general. We don't want to assume anything about anyone. We don't want to apply stereotypes to one person because everybody is individual and everyone has a unique experience. So I think part of that message is really just learning who everybody is at an individual level and learning what they're comfortable with, what language they're comfortable with, what events they're comfortable with, and taking it from there. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yes, thank
awesome,
you.
Kelly.
This is Ben. I want to just step in for a moment both to say thank you. We're not going to have time on today's call to get to all of the questions, but I want to let people know that we'll try to get to as many of them offline as possible. And the speakers have been gracious to say that, you know, whatever questions they're able to connect about offline, they'll also be able to do that. I do want to leave just a few minutes at the end for Isabel to give you some information about the upcoming executive forum, but I also want to give a last-minute opportunity to our presenters. If they want to make any last-minute comments, now would be a great time to do so.
I just want to thank you for having us, and it was great. I hope everyone got something new out of it.
Yeah, this is Kelly. I agree. Thank you so much for everybody for coming. I think one of the questions on here was whether our contact information would be available to people afterwards, and Ben, you can address that, but I do believe that our contact information will be made available to people on the call.
Yeah, and this is Stacey. I'm just so thrilled that Out and Equal took the step, as Erin was talking about at the beginning, to start the virtual summit for 2019 with our content. I just think that's a tremendous message, and I'm very excited about that. So thank you, and thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you all so much. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Isabel to talk a bit more about this year's executive forum.
Thank you, Ben. So before we go, I just want to update everyone on the call about the Executive Forum. As you see here, it's being held on April 16th to 18th. Let me go to the next slide. It's a 3-day event of professional development, and it's really deep dives into the future of LGBTQ workplace equality. And I'm particularly excited about this year where we're convening 5 separate classes with completely different focuses, or I guess foci, but many of them are completely new content. And so I wanted to call out a couple of new things in particular. With our senior executive class, where folks will get a chance to develop their mentorship style and network with LGBTQ senior executive peers, this class will also be really doing a deep dive into LGBTQ equality in 2030. What does it look like, and how do we get there? So if you're invested in sort of working on that project, this is the session for you. Our D&I leader session, which is building a best-in-the-world D&I program on intersectional verticals, is really for folks who are working across D&I issues like self-ID, expats, professional development, recruitment, and we'll also be tackling sort of a big-picture problem, and that is belonging in the workplace of the future. Same thing. What does it look like? How do we get there? So one of the new things about our executive forum this year is really, again, that deep dive into those projects for those classes. Based on the conversations that we had in the webinar today, I think for some of you, the leveraging narratives track, which is a new track, is one that might also be of interest. So if giving a TED-like talk or giving just a talk is part of your bucket list, part of your professional development wishes, this track will prepare you to tell your story and share your big ideas in ways that inspire. So this is all about crafting your authentic narrative, being able to speak your story in order to further your equality goals. We'll also be recording these for folks and giving some professional feedback as well. The professional development class continues with the pipeline to the LGBTQ C-suite. And again, this is an intensive and intimate track where we're going to be talking about establishing your professional brand, about negotiation skills, particularly for those of us who are a little bit earlier in the professional development track, right? Learning a bit more about executive presence, as well as having some opportunities for mentorship from senior LGBTQ leaders. And finally, our newest class is our ERG leaders class, and this is for resource group leaders across employee categories, right? This is not just for LGBTQ sessions. So this is about really taking your resource group to the next level, to thriving in the workplace of the future. Again, this is going to be another deep dive into what resource groups will look like in the future. So I think one thing that I'll just note here before we go is you'll notice that there isn't a specific ally class. And that's because the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really work for our allies at this point. The allies who are working on D&I issues may find that the D&I class makes the most sense, whereas those who are in ERG leadership or sponsorship may find the ERG class.
class a little bit more important, and those allies who are really tapping into their story in order to leverage their allyship may find that the Leveraging Narratives class may be the best for them. So you can find more information, including schedules, on our website at outandequal.org. And if you have any questions about the content, please feel free to email us, at university@outandequal.org, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. And with that, I'll just turn it over to Ben for any final announcements or closing statements.
Perfect. Thank you, Isabel. So I know that we're right at 1 o'clock. That's all our time for today, but I want to say thank you again to all of our presenters on today's call and to all of you attending and engaging in these conversations with us. Remember to join us in February for new webinar sessions, and also we'll be sharing the deck and recording of today's session in an email being sent out tomorrow for everyone who registered, so you can expect that. And then also, please remember to fill out the survey at the end of today's call. It really helps us continue to cater these webinar sessions for you. And with that, I'll see you next time.